Welcome to Despicable Main Deep Dives. Today on the show, imagine this scenario. A major devastating act of terror explodes right here on U.S. soil.
Okay.
But then almost immediately, before the dust even settles, before, the chaos really takes hold, claims start surfacing.
Claims of what?
Claims of a secret plot, one that was apparently averted, stop at the very, very last minute, and the alleged design to drag the United States into a massive brand new war.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like something straight out of a movie.
Right, but this isn't, well, it's not a thriller novel, apparently. It's the really unsettling core of a whole series of specific and, frankly, deeply fascinating allegations we're going to dive into today.
Okay, so what's our mission with this? Where are we heading?
Well, our mission today is to really unpack these claims about a thwarted false flag operation.
The false flag, okay.
And the alleged target, American citizens right here on U.S. soil.
That definitely raises the stakes.
Absolutely. Our sources, they give this really detailed account, primarily, we should say, from Iranian intelligence sources.
Right, that's an important qualifier.
It is. And they describe this scheme centered on an explosion. But critically, and this seems to be the core of it, a really sophisticated plan to plant evidence.
Evidence specifically designed to do what?
To frame Iran.
Okay, so explosion first, then frame Iran.
That seems to be the alleged plan. So we'll explore the mechanics, the sort of how it was supposed to work. Its audacious goals, I mean, really audacious, how it was supposedly stopped.
Yeah.
And then the broader context, the reactions, from different players, even some U.S. politicians.
Got it. And we've got a good range of source material for this deep dive, right?
We do.
Yeah, we've pulled from a collection of, I'd say, pretty compelling reports and analyses. Things like false flag operations and U.S.-Israel relations, frame Iran, false flag plot thwarted, another one called Israelis caught discussing nukes and false flag attacks on U.S. soil to derail Trump's peace plan, thwarted Israeli false flag plot against U.S. citizens, and of course thwarted plot, U.S. explosion to frame Iran.
A lot to draw from.
Definitely. So our goal here really is to pull out the most important nuggets, the key takeaways from all these different sources, and help you, the listener, understand what's most critical in the material we've looked at.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Let's unpack this. It's an extraordinary narrative, really.
Yeah.
Starting with that core allegation, a plot uncovered.
Yeah, the claims themselves are, well, pretty stunning.
They are.
The central claim, as it's laid out in our sources, is that Iranian intelligence asserts very clearly that it successfully thwarted an Israeli false flag terror plot.
Okay. Courted by Iran, alleged plot by Israel.
That's the core allegation. And what immediately jumps out, what really elevates the stakes here, is that this wasn't aimed at some, distant embassy or a ship in the Gulf.
Right.
This plot, according to the claims, specifically targeted American citizens.
On U.S. soil.
On U.S. soil. That changes the entire dynamic.
It absolutely does. And the Iranian officials, they're quite direct in their statements, aren't they? They claim, quote, the explosion was prevented, full stop, because of their intervention.
Yes, very definitive language used there.
So maybe we should clarify for our listeners, this term false flag, it gets thrown around a lot, sometimes maybe misused. In this very serious context, what exactly are we talking about?
That's a really crucial point. A false flag operation, at its absolute core, is an act of calculated, deliberate deception.
Well, okay.
It's carried out by one group, one entity, let's say entity A, but it's meticulously designed, planned, and executed to make it look like a completely different group. Often an adversary, let's say entity B, actually did it.
So making someone else take the blame.
Exactly, making someone else take the blame for your actions. And in this specific context, it's vital to remember, and the sources are pretty consistent on this, these are claims made by Iranian intelligence.
Right, not independently verified facts presented here.
Precisely. It's not presented as, universally accepted truth. It's a profound allegation from one nation's intelligence service against another.
It's a huge claim.
It's a bold assertion, absolutely. And it immediately makes you ask, well, who would even think of such a plan? What was the ultimate goal they were hoping to achieve? And why? Why undertake something with such immense risks, such potential for catastrophic fallout?
Yeah, the why is always the big question. So we're talking about deception on a scale that could potentially redraw geopolitical lines entirely.
That seems to be the implication.
And the mechanics, the how, according to these sources, they were alarmingly specific. The plan wasn't vague. It allegedly involved detonating an explosive inside the United States.
Right, the physical act, the boom.
The boom, the initial devastating physical event.
Mm.
But like we touched on, that explosion itself wasn't the end goal, was it? It was just step one.
Absolutely not the end goal. And that's precisely where the false flag part becomes not just, interesting detail, but truly the crucial, the absolutely integral component of the entire alleged scheme.
Okay, so integral how?
Well, immediately after the physical explosion, the next step in the alleged plan was framing Iran through planted evidence.
Ah, the planted evidence again.
Yes. Our sources consistently highlight this. It wasn't an afterthought. It was central. An essential part of the operation.
Crucial and integral component is how some sources put it.
Exactly that phrase. Without this sophisticated framing piece, the desired strategic outcome of the explosion, whatever that was, simply could not be achieved.
So the physical attack was, what, like the setup?
Essentially, yes. The opening act for a much more complex, much more insidious deception that was supposed to follow immediately.
That's where it gets really, really fascinating. And frankly, quite chilling. Why was framing Iran so essential? An explosion on U.S. soil would cause immense chaos, fear, heartbreak. Why the extra, highly risky step of planting specific evidence?
Because the explosion itself, while tragic, is anonymous until proven otherwise. It's just an attack.
Right, it needs an author.
Precisely. It needed to be unequivocally attributed to Iran. That attribution was key to achieving the larger geopolitical objective. The framing wasn't just important. The sources state it was designed to be a direct follow-up, making it an essential part of the false flag operation.
Okay, so what kind of evidence are we talking about?
Yeah.
Planting evidence after a bombing sounds incredibly difficult, logistically, forensically.
Immensely difficult. And it immediately raises questions about the sheer audacity and the level of detailed planning required.
That's not like...
Now, our sources don't specify the exact type of evidence. They don't say they plan to plant X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
But we can extrapolate, right, based on how these things might work. You could be looking at maybe specific bomb components, things with traceable origins, manufactured to look Iranian.
Or maybe communications.
Exactly. Highly sophisticated electronic devices, maybe burner phones, laptops containing fabricated communication logs, messages designed to point the finger directly at specific Iranian entities, maybe the IRGC or intelligence services.
Or even simpler things, like insignia.
Potentially. Insignia. Symbols associated with alleged Iranian proxy groups, maybe strategically discovered amongst the debris. Things that create an immediate, visceral link in the public eye.
It raises a really important question then. How sophisticated would that framing have to be to convince not just, the initial responders, but forensic experts, intelligence agencies, a skeptical media, the global community?
Extraordinarily sophisticated. It would require an incredible level of detail, a deep, deep understanding of forensic investigation techniques, how to plant things that withstand scrutiny.
Knowing what investigators look for.
Precisely. Knowing how to avoid detection during the planting, how to make it look organic to the blast site. Plus, meticulous intelligence gathering capabilities to ensure the evidence aligns with known Iranian capabilities or methods, making it seem plausible. It would have to be incredibly convincing.
A staggering thought, the level of calculation involved. So, okay, the explosion is the trigger. The meticulously planted evidence, the framing, that's the bullet. And the real target isn't just the immediate victims. It's American public opinion. And ultimately, U.S. foreign policy.
That's exactly how the sources portray the strategic purpose.
Which perfectly transitions us. Let's talk about that strategic purpose.
All right.
Why go to such lengths?
Indeed. The sources are remarkably clear on this point. The primary strategic purpose, the immediate goal of framing Iran, was explicitly designed to manipulate American public opinion.
Manipulate it how? Just make people angry at Iran?
More than just angry. By ensuring the planted evidence directly blamed Iran for a horrific attack on U.S. soil, the alleged perpetrators aimed to meticulously craft a narrative that would instantly dominate the news cycle, the public discourse, everything.
And that is an incredibly powerful lever, isn't it? Especially in a democracy like the U.S. when it comes to foreign policy, war, and peace.
It's perhaps the most powerful lever. Why is manipulating public opinion the critical first step in something like this? It's about manufacturing consent, or at the very least, minimizing dissent for the actions that are intended to follow.
So, creating the justification before the action.
Exactly. If the American public is successfully led to believe, genuinely believe, through what seems like irrefutable, hard evidence that Iran has attacked their homeland, well, the political pressure for retaliation becomes immense. overwhelming.
It overrides everything else.
It really does. This manufactured public outcry, this sense of righteous anger, could effectively short-circuit normal diplomatic processes. It could bypass rational debate about consequences or alternatives. It creates the casus belli, the justification for war, almost instantaneously.
And the sources say this framing was crucial to misleading U.S. authorities and the public.
Yes, misleading both. Because you need the authorities to act, and you need the public to support or at least accept that action. Think about historical examples. Public sentiment can be swayed dramatically by major events, whether they're real, misinterpreted, or, as alleged here, entirely fabricated.
So this alleged plot aimed to create a fait accompli, a done deal. The attack happens, Iran is blamed, war becomes inevitable.
That appears to be the alleged logic. To create a situation where war feels like the only possible response.
And that brings us to the ultimate objective then, because swaying public opinion, while powerful, was just a means to an end, according to these claims.
Absolutely. The overarching goal, the sources allege, was far bigger: to drag the U.S. military into another Middle East conflict on Israel's behalf.
Wow. Stated that directly.
Stated that directly in the analyses we reviewed. The ultimate design of this whole scheme, the explosion, the crucial framing element, was intended, allegedly, to spark a full-scale war between Washington and Tehran.
A full-scale war. We're not talking limited strikes here.
No, this is presented as a geopolitical maneuver of really immense, maybe even unprecedented scale in terms of the potential consequences.
What would that even look like? A full-scale war between the U.S. and Iran. The implications.
The implications are staggering. It would almost certainly not be a contained conflict. You're talking about two major powers, deeply enmeshed in regional alliances and rivalries.
It could pull everyone in.
Very likely. Widespread regional instability seems almost certain. Think about the impact on global energy markets, on trade routes.
The global economy.
Huge disruption, potential economic crisis, and of course, a fundamental shift in the balance of power, not just in the Middle East, but potentially globally.
The sources describe it as a major provocation.
Yes, and one that could have triggered a regional and possibly global war. The language used reflects the perceived gravity of what was allegedly being planned.
The sheer audacity to aim for something that massive, that world-altering, through a single, albeit devastating, deceptive act.
It speaks to an incredible, almost terrifying calculation of risk versus reward, where the perceived reward, perhaps a fundamental realignment of power in the Middle East decisively against Iran, was deemed worth the immense risk of potentially igniting a global conflict.
So the explosion is the trigger, public manipulation is the psychological weapon.
And full-blown war is the strategic target.
Catastrophic. And to make that escalation happen, beyond just the initial public outrage, what else was needed?
The framing, the attribution to Iran, that's the key ingredient. That framing provides the necessary, immediate, and crucially widely accepted casus belli.
The reason for war.
The reason for war. One that seems undeniable, that bypasses the need for lengthy debate or diplomacy. It presents a justification both to the American public and the international community for an overwhelming military response.
It really comes back to that framing being the linchpin, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It cements the idea. The physical violence, however horrific, wasn't enough on its own. It required that fabricated narrative, that direct attribution to Iran.
The sources explicitly call the planted evidence the linchpin.
Yes, the linchpin intended to connect the physical act of violence on U.S. soil directly to Iran.
Serving as the, what was the phrase?
The fabricated justification for a U.S. military intervention that would benefit Israeli geopolitical interests.
Right. So without that linchpin, that crucial step of attribution, the whole alleged structure falls apart.
Completely. It underscores that a false flag isn't just about the bang. It's about the story you tell afterwards, the narrative you build deceptively around that bang.
It's an incredibly complex, deeply disturbing scenario if these claims hold any water. Which brings us to the next urgent question. If this was so elaborate, so high stakes, potentially catastrophic, how was it allegedly prevented?
Okay, this is where the story takes another fascinating and frankly unexpected turn. Another layer of international intrigue gets added.
How so?
According to the Iranian officials cited in our sources, the entire plot, including the explosion and, critically, the planned framing of Iran, was prevented because they were tipped off.
Tipped off? By whom?
By a friendly nation. And that friendly nation is widely believed to be Russia.
Russia tipped off Iran about an alleged Israeli plot against the U.S.
That is the claim presented in the sources.
That's a significant claim in itself. If that's true, it suggests a level of intelligence sharing, maybe cooperation, between Iran and Russia on things that concern both of them that goes maybe far beyond what we generally perceive publicly.
It certainly does. It implies a channel of communication and trust on highly sensitive security matters.
Why Russia, though? Why would they be the friendly nation in this specific scenario? What's in it for them, geopolitically?
Well, think about it from Moscow's perspective. Preventing a major destabilizing war in the Middle East, especially one involving Iran, a key regional player they have ties with, and potentially leading to a direct U.S.-Iran conflict.
That would be a huge disruption they probably don't want.
Exactly. Maintaining some semblance of regional stability, protecting their own influence and interests there, would be a high priority. Preventing a scenario that bogs the U.S. down in another massive Middle East conflict could also serve Russia's broader strategic goals.
Diverting U.S. attention and resources.
Potentially. Or maybe even creating a sense of obligation from Tehran down the line. The sources don't spell out the specific Russian motives, of course.
No.
But the implication is clear. A sophisticated Russian intelligence capability that could detect such a plot, and a strategic decision to share that incredibly sensitive information with Iran, suggesting a pragmatic alignment of interests, at least on this issue, despite whatever other tensions exist.
Okay, so Iran gets this alleged tip-off from Russia. What do they do next? They can't just sit on an intelligence like that, surely.
No, absolutely not. According to the reports, upon receiving this critical intelligence, Tehran's intelligence services acted immediately. They immediately alerted U.S. authorities. They relayed urgent messages directly to high-level American contacts.
Wait, Iran alerted the U.S. directly, despite, everything.
That's the claim. And if accurate, it paints a really striking picture. It suggests a pragmatic, perhaps compartmentalized back channel. A quiet line of communication that exists between Iranian and U.S. intelligence, specifically for critical, time-sensitive security matters, operating completely separately from the overt hostility we usually see.
That really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How deep do those back channels run? What kind of extreme emergencies trigger them? It suggests a whole hidden layer of interaction.
It certainly does. A hidden layer of pragmatic communication when national security on either side is perceived to be under imminent threat.
And this warning, this alert from Iran to the U.S., according to the Iranian officials, that's what stopped it.
That's the claim. That this warning helped stop the attack before it could happen, preventing both the planned explosion and, just as importantly, the subsequent framing of Iran.
That is a colossal claim, not just uncovering a plot, but actively preventing a potential major attack and geopolitical crisis on U.S. soil, thanks to an Iranian warning based on a Russian tip-off.
It is. And it implies, if true, a very swift and effective response on the U.S. side once they received the alert. Verification, corroboration, then rapid action.
Think about the urgency. High-level contacts, urgent messages. How quickly would that information need to be processed, vetted, believed, acted upon to actually stop something like that in time?
The window must have been incredibly narrow. It highlights the critical nature of timely intelligence, but also the existence of channels apparently capable of handling such sensitive information effectively and quickly between adversaries.
But, and this feels like a pretty big but, Iran hasn't actually revealed the specifics, right? Like where this attack was supposed to happen or exactly when.
Correct. And that is a significant point of skepticism, or at least a major gap in the public information. Iran has not revealed the specific location or the precise timing of when or where the supposed detonation and follow-on framing were set to occur.
And that lack of detail, it leaves a lot of room for doubt, doesn't it? It makes it harder to independently verify.
It absolutely does. It leaves considerable room for skepticism and further inquiry. Why withhold those details? Well, there could be legitimate intelligence reasons. Protecting sources and methods is paramount in that world.
Sure.
Or perhaps the intelligence they received, maybe from Russia, lacked that granular detail itself. It might have been more about the what and who than the precise where and when.
Or maybe strategic ambiguity. Keep some cards close to their chest.
That's also a possibility. Strategic ambiguity, allowing Iran to make the claim and gain whatever political capital comes from it without revealing everything they might know or not know. But the bottom line is, without those critical specifics, independent third-party corroboration becomes extremely challenging.
So it remains firmly in the realm of intelligence allegations.
Precisely. Allegations, not publicly verifiable facts at this stage.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's zoom out again then, put this into the broader context. What was the general atmosphere, the geopolitical climate, when these claims surfaced?
The timing, as we mentioned, is really critical here. This whole story emerged just days after a very tense ceasefire had paused a 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran.
Right. Things were already hot.
Extremely hot. And during that conflict, the U.S. had reportedly launched its own strikes against Iranian nuclear sites.
So direct U.S. military action against Iran had just happened.
Correct. You had an environment of incredibly heightened tension, recent direct U.S. military involvement against Iranian targets. The alleged plot surfacing right in the immediate aftermath points to a rapidly shifting, incredibly volatile, and frankly dangerous geopolitical moment.
And there was something about the U.S. strikes, a potential discrepancy.
Yes, our sources mentioned that. While the Trump administration at the time publicly claimed victory, hailed the success of the strikes, leaked images and reports suggest the damage to Iran's facilities was far less than advertised.
So public statements maybe didn't match the reality on the ground.
That's the suggestion, a potential gap between the official narrative and the actual outcome, which could, hypothetically, fuel frustration or perhaps even a sense of needing to escalate further in some quarters. It adds another layer to the already tense backdrop.
That is a crucial backdrop. And it seems this tense atmosphere also sparked some extremely provocative reactions online, particularly from certain voices described as being on Israeli social media.
Yes, that's another element highlighted in the sources. Apparently, following Donald Trump's brokered ceasefire and his renewed push for a peace process, some Israeli social media users expressed pretty intense outrage.
Outrage leading to what?
Leading to calls for, frankly, extreme measures. The sources report these users openly called for extreme measures, including false flag attacks on U.S. soil and even nuclear strikes.
Nuclear strikes. Against whom?
The context suggests potentially against adversaries or even used in a way to disrupt the peace process initiated by Trump. Their stated aim, according to the sources, was to sabotage the peace process and ensure the war machine keeps turning.
That is incredibly disturbing language. Sabotage the peace process with false flags? Or worse?
It is very disturbing, and the sources provide some specific, chilling examples of these alleged comments.
Can you share some of those, just so we understand the tone?
Sure. One quote cited is, "One symbolic bomb in Washington will remind Trump that he is not omnipotent and will restore our national honor."
Wow. Targeting Washington symbolically.
Another user apparently speculated, in a very extreme vein, that Israel might reach our destiny by bombing America, pondering if this could somehow lead to Israel ruling the world and rebuilding the temple.
That's incredibly extreme.
Extremely. And there were even questions posed, like, if Israel were to attack America, what would the targets be? The White House, Silicon Valley, interesting bases.
Okay. It is really vital, as you said, to clarify, these are social media comments. They're not official Israeli government policy.
Absolutely crucial distinction. These represent a segment of opinion, potentially a fringe, but vocal one, not state policy.
But what do comments like that, even if from the fringe, reveal about the underlying sentiments during such a tense period?
They reveal, as our sources put it, a disturbing undercurrent, a willingness among hardline voices to escalate chaos.
Right.
While these comments aren't presented as direct proof or links to the specific thwarted plot we're discussing, they provide a very unsettling context. They show the kind of extreme thinking, the frustration, the rhetoric that can circulate in some online spaces during periods of intense geopolitical friction.
It's fascinating, in a grim way, how extreme frustration with diplomacy can manifest publicly like that.
It really is. It speaks volumes about the passions involved and how, for some, a particular political outcome might be seen as justifying almost any means, no matter how catastrophic.
And this idea, this fear of false flag tactics being used in this region, it isn't entirely new, is it? Analysts have apparently warned about this for years.
That's correct. Our sources note that independent analysts have, for quite some time, voiced concerns. Concerns that Israel, specifically, might resort to false flag operations as a way to provoke U.S. military action against its primary regional rival, Iran.
And where did they fear these attacks might happen?
The fears often centered on potential attacks against American assets, maybe military or diplomatic, somewhere in the Middle East. Or even, more alarmingly, right here on U.S. soil itself.
So this alleged plot, the one Iran claims it thwarted, if it were true, it would fit that pattern.
It would not only fit the pattern, the sources suggest it would be the most blatant example of such a strategy yet. It takes those long-standing fears and theoretical concerns and places them into the context of a specific, allegedly foiled, real-world plot.
So it raises that question again. How does this specific allegation fit into broader, maybe historical patterns of intelligence ops and strategic maneuvering in that part of the world?
It positions it as potentially the culmination, or at least the most extreme proposed example, of a perceived strategic playbook that some analysts have been tracking or warning about for years. It connects a specific incident, albeit alleged, to a wider context of perceived behavior.
Okay, that provides important context.
Yeah.
Now, given the sheer gravity of these claims, a planned attack on U.S. soil, framing another nation, potential for global war, averted by adversaries warning each other what has been the official reaction, particularly from the U.S., and how did the media handle it?
Well, this is one of the most striking parts of the whole story. The silence. Profound silence, largely. U.S. intelligence agencies, according to our sources, have remained completely silent regarding these specific Iranian claims. No confirmation, no denial, no comment whatsoever.
And the media.
Yeah.
Surely a story like this.
Mainstream Western media outlets have, again, according to the sources, barely acknowledged the report. It hasn't received widespread coverage or investigation, certainly not commensurate with the magnitude of the allegations.
That's really telling, isn't it? Silence from intelligence, minimal coverage from major media. What are the implications of that? Why would such a potentially huge story be met with official silence and media quiet?
There are several strong possibilities, and we can only speculate. One, perhaps the most straightforward, is that the information simply remains unverified. U.S. intelligence couldn't corroborate the Iranian claims, so they can't comment publicly.
Plausible.
Another is extreme political sensitivity. Acknowledging an allegation like this, especially one implicating a very close ally like Israel in a plot against the U.S., would be diplomatically explosive. It could trigger a massive crisis, undermine alliances, escalate tensions. Silence might be seen as the least damaging option.
A strategic decision to just not touch it.
Possibly. A deliberate choice not to lend credibility or oxygen to claims that are hard to confirm publicly and could have dangerous consequences if amplified. But this official silence, combined with the media quiet, creates a vacuum.
A vacuum where speculation can grow.
Exactly. It fosters distrust. It allows alternative narratives, maybe conspiracy theories, to flourish because the official channels aren't providing any answers. It really illustrates how geopolitical narratives are shaped not just by what is said, but often more powerfully by what is not said.
That vacuum definitely seems to have extended into the U.S. political sphere, though. Even without official confirmation, some politicians reacted strongly, didn't they? You mentioned Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yes, she reacted very strongly, specifically criticizing the Trump administration's earlier bombing of Iran around that time. She called it a bait and switch and stated quite explicitly that she believed it was done on behalf of Israel.
Strong words.
Very strong. She vowed, according to the sources, to fight against what she termed America-last foreign wars that provoke terrorist attacks on our homeland, military drafts, and nuclear war.
So, connecting foreign intervention directly to domestic risks.
Directly. And she linked it back to Trump's campaign promises, his MAGA agenda promises of no more foreign wars, no more regime change, world peace. She expressed deep dismay, framing it as a betrayal of those promises done essentially to please the neocons, warmongers, military-industrial complex contracts.
That's a very specific critique of the foreign policy establishment.
It represents a distinct viewpoint within the U.S. political right, deeply skeptical of interventionism and alliances perceived as not directly serving American interests first.
And she wasn't the only one expressing skepticism about involvement with Iran.
No, Representative Thomas Massie, also a Republican, was mentioned in the sources as well. He sought to introduce a war powers resolution specifically designed to legally prohibit American military involvement in Iran.
So, legislative efforts to limit potential conflict.
Exactly. These reactions from Greene and Massie highlight that segment of U.S. political opinion we discussed deeply wary of foreign entanglements, particularly in the Middle East, and questioning the benefits versus the costs for America.
It really shows that internal tension in U.S. foreign policy debates.
It absolutely does. Different factions with fundamentally different views on America's role, alliances, and priorities. And again, it's crucial we state we're not endorsing these specific political viewpoints, just reporting on the reactions as presented in our source material.
Understood. Okay, one final, really intriguing piece to this puzzle. There's an alleged U.S. policy shift that supposedly happened because of Iran's help in thwarting this plot. What do the sources claim there?
This is another quite dramatic claim coming from Iranian sources subsequent to the initial reports. They allege that President Donald Trump, in response to Iran providing the intelligence that helped thwart the plot, quietly took a significant step.
Which was?
He allegedly lifted sanctions on Iranian oil exports, specifically those going to China.
Wait, lifted oil sanctions on Iran quietly after Iran helped avert this alleged plot.
That is the allegation from the Iranian sources. And if true, that would represent a dramatic shift in U.S. policy and, just as importantly, a major economic lifeline for Tehran, which was under immense pressure from those sanctions.
Has the U.S. ever confirmed or commented on that specific allegation, lifting oil sanctions for China?
No. According to our sources, the White House has not commented on this particular allegation either. So, like the plot itself, it remains unconfirmed from the U.S. side.
But if it were true, that suggests a kind of secret deal, doesn't it? A clandestine quid pro quo?
It absolutely does. A secret diplomatic maneuver, an unacknowledged thank you or reward for Iran's alleged role in preventing a catastrophic event on U.S. soil, done entirely behind the scenes.
That reveals a whole other level of complexity in international relations.
It really does. This potential unacknowledged exchange, if it happened, sheds light on the complex, often unseen dynamics. It suggests that even between nations with extreme public hostility, these back channels for pragmatic cooperation on critical security matters might not only exist, but could lead to major policy shifts.
Like lifting sanctions, which would be huge.
Huge, a major economic concession. It makes you question how much of international relations is actually conducted in this hidden space, influenced by unacknowledged exchanges and the raw calculations of realpolitik, operating completely beneath the surface of public statements and official diplomacy.
If true, it would completely change how we understand the U.S.-Iran relationship during that period.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
It suggests policy decisions, even major ones, might be driven by incentives and events that are never made public, challenging our surface-level understanding of why nations act the way they do.
Wow. What an absolutely extraordinary deep dive we've undertaken today. It's a lot to process.
It really is.
We've unpacked this incredible, complex, and frankly deeply unsettling narrative. The alleged Israeli false flag plot right here on U.S. soil, with that absolutely critical, integral component of planting evidence to frame Iran.
A plot allegedly designed explicitly to ignite a major war between Washington and Tehran.
And then the claim that Iranian intelligence, tipped off by a friendly nation, widely thought to be Russia, managed to thwart this plot by alerting U.S. authorities, preventing a potentially devastating attack and geopolitical catastrophe.
It's a narrative filled with intrigue at every level.
And this information, whether it's ultimately fully substantiated or remains in the realm of allegation, it undeniably pushes you listening, to think critically.
Absolutely. Critically about how information is presented, how narratives get shaped, sometimes meticulously crafted, and about those hidden currents, those unseen factors that can genuinely drive international relations.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that behind the headlines we read every day, there are these complex, often unconfirmed or even secret maneuvers happening, with implications that can ripple across the globe in ways we might not immediately grasp.
Definitely. The hidden layers are often where the real story lies.
So, as you reflect on everything we've discussed today, just consider the implications. The implications of such an alleged plot on global trust, on stability. If one nation, any nation, were indeed willing to attempt to instigate a war between two others, using a false flag operation on a third-party soil, what does that suggest about the lengths some might go to achieve their geopolitical goals?
It's a sobering thought about the potential ruthlessness of statecraft.
It is. And maybe more practically, how does understanding these kinds of serious allegations, even when they remain unconfirmed, how does that help us? How does it prepare you to be a more discerning consumer of information, especially in a world that seems increasingly shaped by hidden agendas, by strategic deception, by narratives designed to mislead? What stands out to you the most from this deep dive into these layers of international intrigue and alleged deception? Thanks for tuning in to the Despicable Maine Deep Dive podcast. Remember, the United States has been hijacked, so soon living in the United States will be theft of your life. And as always, living in Maine is theft of your life. Every day you are there is just another day stolen.